Sarah was only a waitress. The man who sat at her table was a billionaire, someone who could easily buy everything she owned with pocket money. When he insulted her in a foreign language, thinking she was too dumb to understand, he made the biggest mistake of his life. He did not know that this simple waitress was hiding a secret that would crush his arrogance in less than 60 seconds. This is the true story of how one perfect sentence, spoken in flawless Japanese, completely changed a powerful man's world. By the end of this, you will understand why the quietest people in the room are often the most dangerous. I would love to know who is listening today. Comment below your name and which city you are watching from. Sarah Williams was 24 years old. She felt invisible every day, working at a fancy London restaurant called the Royal Table. This was the kind of place where the rich and powerful came to eat, where a single meal cost more than Sarah earned in an entire week. The room was beautiful, full of shining lights and thick carpet, but for Sarah, it was just a tiring job she needed for survival. What the customers did not know was that Sarah was a brilliant language student. She spoke several languages, but her real gift was Japanese. She had spent a year in Tokyo, immersing herself completely in the language and culture. That skill was hidden behind her polite smile and her neat black uniform until the man at table 5 finished his phone call and made a disrespectful comment, assuming she was just furniture. Sarah took a slow breath, smoothed her apron, and walked straight toward him with the wine list. She reached table 5. Takashi Yamamoto looked up, his expression already showing distaste for the entire establishment. His face was sharp, like he had carved it out of a glacier. Beside him, his two young executives, Yuki and Akira, sat stiffly, afraid to move. Sarah placed the wine list gently on the table. She adjusted a napkin that was slightly off-center near Yamamoto's water glass. As she reached, the cuff of her uniform brushed the glass just enough to tip it. Only a few drops spilled onto the starched white linen tablecloth, but in that sterile, expensive environment, it felt like a disaster. Yamamoto did not move, but his eyes narrowed. He looked past Sarah, addressing his junior staff in a low, cold tone. He spoke in rapid, specialized Japanese, the kind you learn in the highest levels of business school. He was not talking about the water. He was talking about incompetence. He stated that the staff here were only marginally better than robots, trained to follow simple commands, and that anyone who could not manage the simple task of serving water was fundamentally defective. He used a particularly scathing corporate term that implied she was a disposable asset and a stain on the restaurant's reputation, a disgrace to London service. He did this fully confident that the silent waitress was entirely ignorant of the high-level, targeted abuse he was delivering. The two executives winced, sensing the danger, but they dared not disagree. Sarah took a slow internal count to 3. Her heart pounded heavily beneath her black uniform, a drum of pure adrenaline. She did not wipe the spot. She placed both hands neatly behind her back, adopted a perfect 45-degree bow, the exact depth required for a high-ranking corporate apology, and replied, "Mushiwake gozaimasen, Taisho-sama," she began, using the highest, most respectful form of apology for profound regret, and addressing him with a title reserved for a commanding officer or a respected master. The sound of her voice, smooth, clear, and perfectly accented, cut through the background noise of the dining room. Yuki choked on his breath. Akira froze mid-sip. Sarah continued, her tone humble yet unwavering, her vocabulary deliberately chosen to mirror the complex honorifics he had just used to insult her. She spoke about the nature of minor entropy in highly structured environments, countering his claim of fundamental defectiveness with a strategic observation about system failure. She concluded by stating that she was confident that Mr. Yamamoto A man of such great strategic vision surely understood that true value was often hidden behind routine appearances. She had just taken his contemptuous, high-level insult, acknowledged it with perfect humility, and thrown it back at him using language that proved she was not just fluent, but culturally and professionally superior to his expectations. She did all of this in less than 3 sentences. Yamamoto did not blink. The look of cold dismissal on his face was instantly replaced by something far more dangerous. Calculated assessment. He slowly leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He did not look at the executives, who were now completely pale. He looked only at Sarah. "Where did you learn that?" he demanded, switching to English, his voice a low growl. "In Tokyo, sir," Sarah replied, maintaining the polite server's neutrality, though the adrenaline was now making her hands shake slightly behind her back. "On a scholarship." Yamamoto stared at her for a long time, studying the tightness around her eyes, the set of her jaw. He picked up his phone, canceling whatever appointment he had planned for the evening. "Get your manager. Tell them you are leaving right now," he commanded. He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke suit jacket and pulled out a business card. It was not paper. It was thick, cold metal, etched with the logo of the Yamamoto Property Group and the address in Canary Wharf. 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. My office. Be late, and you will find your scholarship has somehow disappeared from all official records. We will talk about your value then." He placed the card on the table, a tiny, heavy rectangle of absolute power. Sarah nodded once, accepted the card, and backed away, the metal burning a strange, cold spot in her palm. The room had gone quiet for the brief, terrible exchange, and now the noise slowly crept back in, though every waiter and patron nearby was looking at her with confusion and awe. Victoria Rivers, the older territorial waitress who served the next section, watched the entire exchange from the bar with a look of pure, concentrated fury. Sarah managed to finish the remaining 2 hours of her shift in a blur. She felt physically drained, as if she had just finished a marathon. The confrontation had been exhilarating, terrifying, and now the reality of the morning appointment loomed large. She knew this was not a job offer. It was a trial by fire. When she finally got home, the small apartment was dark. Her mother, Helen, usually left a light on in the kitchen. Sarah felt a prickle of unease. She found Helen in the living room, propped up against several pillows, looking sickly gray in the dim light. Helen's forehead was covered in a thin sheen of sweat, despite the apartment being cool. "Mum? What happened?" Sarah rushed over, kneeling beside the sofa. "The doctor called," Helen whispered, her voice frail. "The tests. They are worse than they thought, sweetie. It's the chronic issue, but it's escalating. They need to do the procedure immediately. Next week. Maybe sooner, if they can fit me in." Sarah sat back on her heels, the shock hitting her stomach like a punch. "How much?" she asked, already dreading the answer. Helen weakly handed her a crumpled estimate from the hospital. The numbers swam, but the final sum was clear. A massive figure that dwarfed their current savings and wiped out everything Sarah had managed to put aside. It was far more than she had anticipated, and it needed to be paid up front, or at least a significant portion of it. The time crunch was the worst part. She needed money immediately, not in 6 months. Sarah stood up, walking to the counter. She pulled out the heavy metal card from her uniform pocket. The cold certainty of Takashi Yamamoto's demands seemed suddenly manageable compared to the panic gripping her chest. She had a chance, a dangerous, frightening chance, to earn the money they desperately needed. But if Yamamoto's test failed, if he discovered her secret past in Tokyo, or if she simply did not perform perfectly, the immediate urgent cost of her mother's life-saving procedure would still be there, hovering over her like a dark cloud, and she would have nothing left to fight it with. Sarah secured the job immediately. Takashi Yamamoto, true to his style, did not waste time. She had passed the test, and now she was an asset. But the cold logic of the Yamamoto Property Group extended beyond the intimidating boardroom. When Sarah spoke to the HR department, a function outsourced to a highly efficient but soulless firm, she was told the standard procedures for international transfers. Her massive promised salary would be paid in quarterly installments, with the first installment released 30 business days after the start date, pending security clearance. 30 business days. That meant 6 weeks, perhaps longer, given bureaucratic delays. The immediate urgent amount needed for her mother's procedure was due in less than a week. The delay, seemingly standard corporate practice, felt like a deliberate act of cruelty, or perhaps a final calculated test orchestrated by Yamamoto himself. The high salary would secure their future, but it would not save her mother now. Sarah knew her options were zero. Banks would never approve such a large, unsecured loan so quickly. She needed cash, fast, with no questions asked. She thought about the faces that drifted through the royal table after closing time. Not the diplomats or the CEOs, but the silent men in expensive, ill-fitting suits who handled cash transactions and favored private booths. She knew one of them, Marcus Thorne. He was not a frequent diner, but he was a known entity, a person who dealt in favors and fear. He had been pointed out to her by a retired bartender as the answer man for impossible deadlines. Sarah found a contact number for him through a nervous chef, bribing him with the last of her tips. The meeting took place 2 days later, not at the opulent royal table, but in a quiet, dark bar in Soho. Thorne was wide, wearing a simple black coat, his movements slow and deliberate. He ordered a bourbon and slid a coaster across the table to Sarah. Thorne listened to her request, without changing his expression. He knew exactly who Sarah was, the quiet, smart waitress from the expensive place. He named a number for the interest that made the air feel thin. It was triple what any bank would charge. He demanded collateral, a series of signed, post-dated checks, and access to her newly signed contract with Yamamoto Property Group as proof of future income. Sarah hesitated, the cold paper of the loan agreement shaking in her hand. Accepting this meant signing over her future to a dangerous man and exposing the financial engine of her new life. But she looked at the time on her phone. 3 days until the hospital needed payment. Her mother's breathing was already sounding shallow. She signed. The transaction was quick, the stack of clean, crisp notes feeling heavy and unreal in her worn leather bag. The debt was settled, for now. Sarah had bought time, but at a punishing cost. Sarah started work the following Monday. The offices of the Yamamoto Property Group were glass and steel, towering over the docklands of Canary Wharf. Everything was silent, sterile, and cold. She was assigned a small desk near the executive wing, a clear signal that she was neither fully trusted nor fully integrated. Her immediate supervisors, the junior executives Yuki and Akira, treated her with barely concealed resentment. Yuki, thin and overly formal, spoke to her only in clipped, necessary sentences, ensuring every word underlined his higher position. He never used her first name, only Williams. Akira, bulkier and more nervous, avoided eye contact entirely, communicating mostly through aggressive, passive-aggressive emails about filing procedures. They saw her as an interloper, a Western waitress who had somehow bypassed the years of grueling corporate ladder climbing they had endured. Their goal was clear: prove she was a mistake. Sarah spent her first few weeks working punishing hours. She used her polyglot skills daily, translating complex legal briefs from French and Mandarin and applying the nuanced linguistic analysis Yamamoto demanded. She felt constantly exposed, operating under the assumption that every word she spoke was being weighed, not just for meaning, but for loyalty. The pressure from the loan, however, was worse than the corporate paranoia. Thorne had insisted on weekly communication, claiming he needed updates on her stability. She found herself answering cryptic calls, always using a low voice, always tense. One evening, exhausted, Sarah was leaving the office late. The lobby was mostly empty, the security guard reading a magazine behind the desk. Her phone buzzed. It was Thorne. "Ms. Williams." His voice was rough over the line. "Just making sure everything is running smoothly. Your new workplace is impressive. I hear you were hired right out of the royal table." Sarah froze near the elevator bank. How did he know that? She had never mentioned the restaurant to him, only her new employer. "I worked there previously," Sarah managed, trying to keep her voice level. "Yes," Thorne said, a dry chuckle crackling in the background. "A colleague of mine mentioned you. She's quite observant. Says you spilled water on a very important man and then spoke something foreign to him. Quite the story." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Only Victoria, or someone Victoria spoke to regularly, would know the specific detail about the spilled water and the foreign language response. Thorne was connected to Victoria. Her urgent, secret debt was now known by her enemy. "Who is your colleague?" Sarah demanded, leaning against the cold glass wall of the skyscraper lobby, suddenly feeling vulnerable and exposed, despite the high security. There was a sharp, unprofessional pause on Thorne's end. Then a voice, much closer than the phone, cut across the silence. "Williams." It was Yuki. He was standing 20 feet away, leaning against a marble pillar, holding a tablet, his face stiff with disapproval. Thorne, hearing the interruption, immediately changed his tone. "Call me back later, Ms. Williams. We'll discuss payment schedules. And perhaps," he added, his voice dropping slightly, "your friends." Sarah quickly ended the call, shoving the phone into her purse. She turned to Yuki, trying to regulate her breathing and hide the fear that pulsed behind her eyes. "Mr. Yuki," she said, managing a formal bow. Yuki pushed off the pillar, walking slowly towards her. The lights of the lobby gleamed off his perfect suit. He did not ask who she was talking to. He just looked down at the tablet in his hand. "Yamamoto-sama requires an immediate translation of this correspondence," Yuki stated, his voice low and judgmental. "It involves a sensitive deal in Paris that has stalled due to cultural misunderstandings. And, Williams, I must remind you, the terms of your employment prohibit unnecessary personal calls during company hours or while on company property." He held out the tablet. The screen displayed a digitized image of an old, handwritten letter, crinkled and faded. Sarah took the tablet, her hands still shaking slightly from the combination of the conversation with Thorne and the encounter with Yuki, trying desperately to focus on the task. The document was in perfect, formal Japanese. She read the sender's name in the corner of the faded paper, and her breath hitched. The letter was addressed to Takashi Yamamoto, but the signature belonged to a high-ranking executive of the Tanaka Group, Yamamoto's bitter generational rival. The text described a specific meeting in Tokyo 6 years ago, exactly when Sarah had been living there under the Tanaka Group's secret funding. Sarah quickly scanned the document, looking for the date, the content, anything that would connect her to this ancient corporate war. The final line of the letter was a cultural reference, a proverb often used in diplomatic closure, translated roughly as, "The shadow of the great tree harbors all secrets." As Sarah read the powerful, unsettling prose, a small, nearly invisible note popped up in the corner of the digital screen, written in faint red text, evidently added by a corporate security analyst scanning the document for leaks. It read, "Note: check source of Tokyo scholarship funding." Sarah felt the world spin. Yamamoto knew. Or, at the very least, his security team was already digging into the exact secret she had risked everything to hide. She looked up at Yuki, who was watching her with an unnerving, vacant stare, waiting for her translation. Yuki raised an eyebrow, a flicker of cruel satisfaction in his eyes. "Well, Williams, does the language fail you now?" Sarah felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her skin tight and cold. The ink on the paper felt suddenly real. A physical weight connecting her to a history she had sworn was buried forever. The Tanaka Group. They had paid for her time in Tokyo, not the official university fund. That fact was the core of her vulnerability, the reason she had spent the last year working every available hour. Terrified that discovery would ruin her mother and label her a corporate spy. She focused on Yuki's mocking smile. His face was sharp, demanding an immediate answer. "Williams," he repeated, leaning forward across the mahogany desk. "Does the language fail you now?" Sarah pushed the panic down, finding the cold, mechanical part of her mind that only dealt with data. She had to translate the contract amendment flawlessly, right now, as if she had not just stared into the abyss of her own destroyed future. She cleared her throat, her voice steady and professional. "Apologies, Mr. Yuki. I was noting the shift in the asset valuation clause. It moves from net realizable value to historical cost accounting for the ancillary structures. The translation is clean." She rattled off the Japanese equivalent, using the correct, respectful honorifics for the legal terms. Yuki's satisfied look immediately vanished, replaced by thinly veiled disappointment. He had wanted her to stumble, to fail the linguistic challenge. "Continue," he snapped, waving her away from the specific document that contained the handwritten note. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of spreadsheets and dry corporate policy. Sarah maintained her professional mask, translating complex French and Mandarin documents regarding European regulatory compliance. But underneath the calm exterior, her core temperature felt dangerously low. She knew this was not a simple filing error. Yamamoto's personal assistant, a ghost-like woman who saw everything and spoke nothing, must have initiated the check. The Ice Emperor was hunting. That afternoon, she was summoned to Takashi Yamamoto's private office on the top floor. The room was aggressively silent, offering a panoramic, unnerving view of London stretched out below the glass. The air conditioning was set impossibly low, matching the chill radiating from the man himself. Yamamoto did not offer her a seat. He simply stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city as if he owned every inch of it. "Williams," he said, his voice quiet, almost bored. He spoke in English, which was unusual, increasing the formality of the interaction. "You understand that this company operates on absolute trust. Absolute." Sarah kept her posture straight, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Yes, Mr. Yamamoto. I understand the importance of confidentiality and loyalty." Yamamoto finally turned, his gaze like surgical steel. He didn't mention the Tanaka Group. He didn't mention the scholarship. He didn't have to. "I have a task for you. A critical acquisition in Paris. A multi-million-pound property deal. It has stalled. The French negotiators are playing games. They have retreated into cultural obscurity. We need a way forward, or we lose the entire investment and incur significant penalty costs." He walked to his heavy, polished desk and placed a thick file marked "Confidential, Paris" in front of her. "The current analysis suggests they are focused on price. My initial analysis suggests something else entirely. They are using their language, their cultural understanding of relationship, to obscure their true financial position. They are testing our patience. They are testing our cultural awareness." Yamamoto leaned his large frame slightly toward her. "I need you to prepare the final strategic brief. I don't want a simple translation of their last offer. I want an analysis of their intent. I want to know who they are, what motivates them outside the balance sheet, and precisely how they are using language, the social linguistics, Williams, to manipulate this negotiation." He paused, letting the weight of the moment crush the air out of the room. You were hired because you understand how to use language as a weapon. Now, use it for us. If this negotiation fails, the company will have a serious problem. And you, Williams, will be responsible for the intelligence failure. It was a test of loyalty and competence wrapped in a high-stakes, nearly impossible assignment. He was forcing her to deploy the advanced knowledge she gained from her time in Tokyo, knowledge that now exposed her to him. If she succeeded, she proved her value. If she failed or hesitated, he would confirm his suspicion that she was unwilling to use her full capacity for his company, perhaps reserving her skills for a rival. "I understand, sir," Sarah said, picking up the file. It was cold in her hands. "I will start immediately." Yamamoto watched her walk to the door, a faint, almost invisible smile playing on his lips. She knew then that the scrutiny had begun. Every choice she made, every recommendation, would be viewed through the lens of her potential betrayal. Meanwhile, miles away from the cold glass tower, Victoria Rivers sat in a dimly lit, sticky-floored pub near Borough Market, nursing a glass of cheap gin. She was meeting Leo, a peripheral contact from the loose network centered around the loan shark, a network she was now indebted to. Leo was a man of greasy hair and restless eyes, useful only for gathering low-level, sensitive gossip for a price. "So, the little server girl is playing high finance?" Victoria sneered, pushing a crumpled 50-pound note across the table. Leo pocketed the cash instantly. "Yeah, Williams. Real big shot now. She's definitely still in deep with Mr. Costas, though. Paid the interest on the short-term loan, but the principal is still there. Big number. She's terrified about her mom." "I don't care about her debts," Victoria said impatiently. "I care about her job. Did she talk? Did she say what she is working on? Something specific?" Leo shrugged, sipping his flat beer. "She mentioned something about needing the money secured by the end of the week, maybe early next week. Something about a massive deal in France that was having issues. She was talking about how the French guys were being too personal, or some nonsense, refusing to look at the numbers because they didn't trust the vibe." Victoria's mind raced. France. Immediate timeline. Cultural stumbling blocks. This was it. Sarah was being put in charge of something critical, likely involving the cultural pivot needed to close the deal. "The French deal," Victoria murmured. "When is the final meeting? Does she know the date?" Leo looked around nervously. "She didn't say the exact day, but she told Costas she needed to have the strategy finalized, absolutely finalized, by close of business Thursday. They fly out immediately after. It's happening now." Victoria smiled, a cold, predatory expression that felt alien on her face. A massive European acquisition, currently stalled on cultural grounds. This was the perfect moment to strike. By injecting precisely tailored misinformation into the public domain, or perhaps directly to the opposing side, Victoria could make Sarah's strategic advice look foolish, destroying the fragile trust she had just begun to build with Yamamoto. It would not only satisfy her need for revenge for her father, but it would also, perhaps, earn her favor with the loan shark network by proving her utility as an informant. She stood up abruptly, leaving Leo staring at his beer. She had a contact in a low-level press aggregator who owed her a favor, someone desperate for any scrap of corporate drama involving the powerful Japanese magnate. Victoria walked out into the cool London evening, pulling out her phone. She felt a surge of wicked excitement. She knew the narrative she needed to plant. A story suggesting Yamamoto's heavy-handed, notoriously direct approach was already sabotaging the delicate negotiation, confirming the worst fears of the highly sensitive French party. She typed a quick, cryptic message into her phone, designed to sound like high-level corporate gossip coming from Canary Wharf itself. Yamamoto Group's strategy for Paris is fundamentally flawed, too aggressive, too focused on raw power. Expect cultural clash to collapse deal within 48 hours. She hit send, committing to the sabotage, crossing a line she could not return from. The text confirming the message receipt flashed back, and just as she was about to delete the evidence, the phone rang, displaying an unknown number. Victoria hesitated, her heart hammering against her ribs. She answered, her voice tight. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was deep, smooth, and laced with quiet menace. Victoria Rivers. "We know you are gathering information about Mr. Yamamoto's new asset, Sarah Williams. We have been watching her, too. We would like to collaborate." The deep, smooth voice confirmed Victoria's worst fears and highest hopes. They knew everything, not just about Sarah, but about the negotiation schedule, too. They did not need her specific input on linguistics, only confirmation of the cultural pressure points Sarah had highlighted to Yamamoto. Victoria swallowed hard, tasting the metallic tang of fear and reckless excitement. The man on the phone promised a substantial payment, enough to clear her immediate debts and provide a cushion. All she had to do was provide the small, crucial piece of context that would make the existing media narrative about Yamamoto explosive. Victoria typed the anonymous email, using a public internet cafe far from the royal table. She confirmed to her new contacts that Sarah had advised Yamamoto that the French business group was extremely sensitive to any perceived corporate aggression or disrespect of their local historical contribution. Victoria then detailed Yamamoto's reputation for immediate drastic restructuring post-acquisition. The message was concise. Frame Yamamoto's directness, which Sarah had cautioned against, as a ruthless, premeditated disrespect for French culture, guaranteeing job losses and property destruction. This, coupled with the existing financial rumors, would completely destroy the foundation of trust. The following Tuesday, the London business press and several minor Parisian outlets ran concurrent stories based on anonymous leaks. The articles did not criticize the price of the acquisition, which was fair, but attacked the intent behind the purchase. They painted Takashi Yamamoto as the bulldozer from the East, ready to flatten the historic property and discard the local workforce like garbage. The articles used the very cultural sensitivities Sarah had advised Yamamoto to avoid. The Canary Wharf office was an earthquake zone. Yuki and Akira scurried like rats, trying to suppress the global flow of bad news. Yamamoto sat behind his immense mahogany desk, looking less like the Ice Emperor and more like a statue carved from frozen granite. Sarah was called into his office immediately. The door closed with a heavy sound that seemed to seal them off from the rest of the world. "The Duchamp Group has delayed signing," Yamamoto stated, his voice dangerously low, almost a whisper. "They cite a profound and sudden lack of confidence in our stated intentions. This leak, Williams, it is too precise. It attacks the exact cultural nerve you identified just last week." Sarah felt a cold dread settle in her stomach, recognizing the targeted precision of the strike. Someone knew her strategy. "Mr. Yamamoto, I only shared that analysis with you, Yuki, and Akira. I did not include those notes in any general email. This information could only have come from someone who saw my internal report or was present in that strategic briefing." Yamamoto leaned forward, resting his hands flat on the polished desk. His eyes, usually sharp, were now piercing, showing no trace of emotion. "You told me your time in Tokyo was financed by a standard academic scholarship." The sudden change of subject knocked the air from Sarah's lungs. The unspoken threat hung heavy between them. "That is correct, sir," she managed, her voice steadier than her heart. "My security team has been looking closer into the endowment structure of that specific grant," Yamamoto continued, never blinking. "A highly unusual extremely limited fund, managed by a shell company in Okinawa, a shell company, Williams, that is directly owned by the Tanaka Group. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. He knew. Her fear, the secret she had spent years burying, was now exposed, weaponized. Silence, he commanded. The financial link is undeniable. You were funded by my fiercest rival. Now, a crucial negotiation is failing because the very cultural advice you gave me was twisted and leaked. It looks, Williams, like you were planted here not just to translate, but to cause calculated, surgical ruin. That is not true, Sarah insisted, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. My loyalty is to the job, sir. My mother's medical debt is my only driving factor. The Tanaka connection was a funding mechanism I accessed out of desperation, not malice. If I were truly a spy, why would I have offered the strategic advice that is now being used against us? I would have just stayed quiet and watched the deal fail naturally. Yamamoto absorbed this, his expression softening only marginally. Perhaps you are simply sloppy. Regardless, we leave for Paris in 2 hours. You will attend the final meeting with the Duchamp Group. This deal must be salvaged. If you fail, I will not only destroy your reputation, I will ensure that the Tanaka Group believes you betrayed them as well. The ultimatum was terrifying. Sarah understood. He was testing her loyalty under fire, forcing her to choose between the dark past and the uncertain future. The conference room high above the Parisian streets was breathtakingly opulent, yet it felt cold and sterile. The French negotiating team, Monsieur Duchamp, the stern managing partner, Madame Moreau, the chief legal counsel, and Monsieur Lefebvre, their chief finance officer, sat opposite them. They did not smile. They did not offer small talk. Yamamoto, radiating controlled fury, took the lead, speaking in clipped English, ignoring the cultural sensitivities Sarah had warned him about just moments before. He demanded clarification on the delay, citing the contract's strict timelines. Monsieur Duchamp, a thin man with silver hair and an air of tired aristocracy, replied in measured, perfect English. Mr. Yamamoto, the details of the price are irrelevant now. We cannot proceed with a party whose stated business intention, as widely reported, is to dishonor the legacy and the people who have cultivated this business for 3 generations. This is not about the numbers. It is about respect. Yamamoto's face hardened. He opened his mouth to deliver a furious, direct rebuttal. A rebuttal that Sarah knew would confirm every negative stereotype circulating in the press, officially killing the deal. Sarah moved instantly. She leaned across the wide, polished table, placing her hand gently but firmly on Yamamoto's forearm, stopping him mid-sentence. The room went silent. Stopping Takashi Yamamoto while he was speaking was an act of corporate treason. Yuki's eyes went wide with panic. Sarah turned her focus entirely to the French team, particularly Monsieur Duchamp, her expression earnest and deeply respectful. She spoke, not in English, but in flawless, highly formal French, the elevated register of diplomatic discourse she had mastered in Tokyo, a language designed entirely for the careful navigation of status and honor. Monsieur, Madame, she began, her voice clear and carrying conviction, if you would grant me 1 moment of your indulgence. I am the cultural consultant for the Yamamoto Group, and I must confess to my grave error. The misinformation you have received, the talk of dishonor and destruction, stems from a fundamental linguistic failure, a failure I own entirely. She paused, allowing the weight of the confession to settle. The English language, in its corporate application, is sadly linear and direct. It forces us to speak of immediate action and efficient restructuring. These terms, when translated literally, suggest a callous disregard for history. However, Sarah continued, meeting Duchamp's skeptical gaze, I assure you, Mr. Yamamoto's intentions, which I failed to convey adequately in my initial reports to him, are entirely centered on integration and generational sustainability. Sarah lowered her voice slightly, adopting a tone of scholarly appeal. The true meaning of Mr. Yamamoto's investment is not bulldozing. It is curation. He seeks not to destroy the building blocks of your legacy, but to preserve them while ensuring their stability for the next 3 decades. She delivered the final calculated line directly to Duchamp, using a specific French honorific for the preservation of cultural heritage, an expression rarely heard in modern corporate settings. He respects the architecture of your past. He asks only for the opportunity to become the responsible guardian of your future. Sarah straightened up, her breath held tight in her chest. Every eye in the room was fixed on her. The ball was now entirely in the French court. Monsieur Duchamp slowly placed his pen down on the table, leaned back, and gazed at her, his expression unreadable. Monsieur Duchamp slowly placed his pen down on the table, leaned back, and gazed at her, his expression unreadable. The clock ticking somewhere high on the wall seemed too loud. The air in the conference room felt thick and heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. Sarah did not move. She felt the sudden, complete stillness of her own body, a rigidity born of sheer, terrifying exhaustion. She had given everything she had. After a long moment that stretched into minutes, Duchamp spoke, his voice low and deliberate, keeping his eyes entirely on Sarah, ignoring Yamamoto. A guardian, he repeated, testing the word like fine wine on his tongue. That is a powerful distinction, Mademoiselle Williams. It changes the entire texture of this agreement. Mr. Yamamoto was, perhaps, communicating merely the economic value of the stone when we were demanding respect for the historical carving. He paused, leaning forward again, resting his elbows on the polished wood. Very well. If your employer is prepared to accept an addendum guaranteeing the architectural integrity and cultural preservation of the properties for the next 50 years, enforced by a specific, non-negotiable cultural committee, then the acquisition is agreed. A single, muffled breath escaped Yuki's lips at the other end of the table, instantly swallowed by the silence. Yamamoto, who had remained frozen, a statue of calculating indifference, gave only a sharp, quick nod. It was not a thank you. It was merely the confirmation that his strategy, or Sarah's intervention, had produced the desired outcome. "Yuki, Akira," Yamamoto instructed, his voice flat, emotionless. "Draft the necessary changes immediately. Send copies to the Paris office for immediate legal review. This meeting is concluded." He stood up, his movement swift and absolute, signaling the end of the tension with physical authority. Sarah felt a sudden rush of heat, followed by an instant chill. The sweat that had gathered on the back of her neck turned cold. Her knees felt weak and shaky, as if she had just finished running a marathon. She forced her face to remain neutral, masking the complete physical collapse that threatened to overtake her. She had saved the deal. The multi-million-pound acquisition was secured. Duchamp rose and offered Sarah his hand. His grasp was firm. "You have a remarkable way with language, Mademoiselle Williams. It is not translation. It is reconstruction." "Thank you, monsieur," Sarah replied in crisp French, finally allowing the tension in her shoulder blades to ease just a fraction. As they exited the cold, formal meeting room and walked down the long, carpeted hall of the Parisian building, Sarah kept her gaze fixed straight ahead. Yuki and Akira were already whispering nervously to each other, their initial resentment momentarily overshadowed by the dizzying relief of not having failed their boss. Yamamoto walked ahead of them, his pace fast and unrelenting. He reached the elevator lobby and punched the button for the ground floor. They waited in silence, the mirror-like surfaces of the elevator reflecting their tired, relieved, and still hostile faces. When they reached the lobby and spilled out onto the street, the crisp, late-afternoon air of Paris hit Sarah, momentarily clearing the fog in her head. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket, intending to send a quick, non-committal text to her mother, who was waiting for an update on the procedure they needed. A new message, however, flashed up, not from her mother, but from an unrecognizable number. The contact name was simply listed as the collector. Sarah's breath hitched. She felt the sudden return of that cold rigidity in her spine, but this time it was pure fear, not professional adrenaline. The text was short, direct, and used the code they had agreed upon for missed payments. "The garden is dry. We need water now. I will see the caretaker tomorrow at 10. Do not disappoint me." The weight of the Paris success vanished instantly, replaced by the crushing reality of the debt she had incurred when the first corporate payment was delayed. The loan shark, known as the collector, was demanding the interest due before the full amount was even scheduled to be paid. The caretaker was her mother. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide, scanning the busy Parisian street. The victory had secured her job, yes, but it had not secured her mother's immediate safety. The massive corporate relief was immediately overshadowed by a crippling personal dread. Yamamoto had just settled into the back seat of the waiting black car, his door already half closed. Before the driver could pull away, Sarah stepped quickly to the window, knocking lightly on the tinted glass. Yamamoto lowered the window slowly, his dark eyes focusing on her, impatient but not yet angry. "Mr. Yamamoto," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly despite her attempt to keep it firm. She shoved the phone back into her pocket, knowing she could not bring herself to ask for an advance. Not now, not after the high-stakes gamble she had just pulled off. "I need 24 hours to handle a critical personal matter back in London. I can be back on the first flight the day after tomorrow, ready to review the legal documents." Yamamoto stared at her, analyzing her strained face. He saw the genuine, raw panic in her eyes, a look deeper than any professional stress. He knew she had performed brilliantly, saving his company millions, but he did not tolerate weakness. "A personal matter?" he repeated, his tone icy. "You understand the sensitivity of this closing, Williams? The Tanaka Group would exploit any delay." "I understand, sir. This is necessary. I will ensure no documentation is held up. It is entirely personal. It cannot wait." Yamamoto held her gaze for several more agonizing seconds, calculating the risk. Her performance in the room had bought her temporary credit. 24 hours, Yamamoto said, the words cutting like glass. "Not a minute more. Fail to return promptly, and your position is terminated. The severance will be 0. The window silently glided up. The heavy black car pulled away, leaving Sarah standing alone on the sidewalk, holding the phone that contained the threat against her family. She had won the corporate war, but she had just realized she was losing the domestic battle. She needed to get back to London immediately. The victory felt like ashes in her mouth, a painful, temporary relief that had only bought her a brief moment before the real fear began again. Sarah did not wait for morning. She took the first available Eurostar train back to London, the fear tightening around her chest, making every breath shallow. She was not thinking about contracts or cultural negotiations now. She was thinking about survival. She had Takashi Yamamoto's implied promise, but she knew his promises were conditional on her performance, and right now, her greatest performance needed to be saving her mother. She tracked down the loan shark, a man named Marcus, near a deserted back street close to the royal table just before midnight. He was expecting the money, or a reason why he should apply more pressure. Sarah walked straight toward him, ignoring the two men standing behind him in the shadow. She did not plead or apologize. "You have been speaking to Victoria Rivers," Sarah stated, her voice steady and hard. Marcus smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "I talk to a lot of people, love. Business is about information. The information you used to threaten my mother. The information about the Paris negotiation. Victoria gave it to you. She thought she was settling an old score, destroying me for a business deal that happened years before I was born. But she didn't realize who she was setting herself against." Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him a picture of the Canary Wharf Tower. The Yamamoto logo, prominent and cold against the glass. "I work for the Ice Emperor now. The amount I owe you is nothing to him. But the cost of causing him trouble, the cost of threatening his staff's family, that cost is infinite. You will be paid, Marcus, every penny, but only after you write down exactly how Victoria Rivers gave you the specific dates and details of my strategy." Marcus's face went stiff. He looked from Sarah's determined eyes to the phone screen. He knew the name Yamamoto. He knew that world was far beyond his reach, and the trouble Sarah described was real. He had wanted the money, but he did not want to disappear. Within 30 minutes, Sarah had a signed, shaky note detailing Victoria's malicious leaks. She returned to the Canary Wharf office at 6 in the morning, 12 hours ahead of Yamamoto's deadline. She was tired, but she was armed. She presented the paper to Yamamoto, who was already at his desk, drinking bitter black tea. He read the note once, slowly, his expression unchanging. He saw the full pattern now. The Tanaka connection was a risk, but Victoria's actions were targeted. Unprofessional sabotage. He saw that Sarah had been fighting two wars simultaneously, the corporate one and the personal one, and that she had used her strategic mind to win both. "The debt," Yamamoto said, finally putting the paper down. "How much is the total medical cost, including this immediate procedure?" Sarah told him the number. It was 6 figures, large enough to ruin a normal life, but barely a rounding error for Yamamoto Property Group. He looked at her, searching her face for any trace of weakness or greed. "This is a loan, Williams, covered immediately, managed by our firm's discreet finance group. You will sign a secondary employment agreement extending your commitment by 3 years. The terms are simple: continued high performance and absolute loyalty to this company's interests. If you violate this, the debt reverts to you, immediately and with penalty interest." "I agree," Sarah said instantly. She did not need 3 years. She needed her mother safe now. She knew she would hold up her end of the deal. Yamamoto nodded, satisfied. He reached for his desk phone. He did not call the police. He called his head of corporate security and gave 2 terse commands. One concerning the immediate payment of a medical debt, and the other concerning a waitress named Victoria Rivers. Victoria was informed of her termination from the royal table 2 days later. The management made it sound like performance failure, but the message from the Canary Wharf legal team was clear. Do not speak about Yamamoto Property Group or Sarah Williams again. Her attempts at karmic justice had led only to her own ruin, leaving her with the financial desperation she had hoped to inflict on others. The next 6 months were a steady climb for Sarah. Helen Williams underwent the procedure successfully. Freed from the weight of fear and debt, Sarah dedicated herself fully to her new role as a strategic cultural consultant. She moved out of the cramped flat and into a small, well-lit apartment. She finished her final university requirements with ease. Yamamoto, watching Sarah thrive in an environment of respect rather than fear, began to change. He realized that intellectual honesty, the kind that Sarah forced him to accept, was more profitable than blind compliance. One cold afternoon, 6 months after the Paris deal, Sarah stood with Yamamoto overlooking the city from his office. Yuki and Akira were gone, replaced by executives who valued substance over cultural posturing. "You proved your point, Williams," Yamamoto stated, looking at the distant curve of the river. "Integrity is useful. It is a necessary tool, though a sharp one. It is the only way to build lasting trust, Mr. Yamamoto," Sarah replied. Yamamoto turned. "The firm will establish the Cultural Exchange Scholarship Fund. It will finance foreign students studying advanced social linguistics in Japan, with no ties to any specific corporate family. It will be named after my father, but you will manage the selection process. It is a necessary investment in the future." Sarah felt a deep, quiet pride. She had not only secured her mother's future and her own freedom from paralyzing debt, but she had forced a change in the Ice Emperor's empire. She was no longer running from a secret past. She was building a public future based on competence and ethical knowledge. Her relationship with Yamamoto was a perpetual negotiation, built on mutual respect and the recognition that they both needed the other to succeed. Sarah Williams had found her power, not in revenge or secrecy, but in the unwavering authority of perfect, timely knowledge. The exchange of words had saved her life, and in turn, saved a piece of his legacy. What did you think of this story? Now, I want you to leave a score from 0 to 10 on what you thought.